listening to Overwatch League Daily, your daily source for Overwatch League news, scores, and more. Here's your host, KickedTripod.
Good morning, Overwatch League fans, and welcome to Overwatch League Daily, your daily source for Overwatch League news, scores, and opinions. I am John KickedTripod Horstman, and here's your Overwatch League Daily episode for December 8th, 2017. Day 2 of 4 of the Overwatch League preseason is in the books. We saw fan favorites London Spitfire, Dallas Fuel, Houston Outlaws, and NYXL, among other teams, go at it last night, and we'll tell you who came out on top. Day 3 of the preseason begins today. Find out who plays and when. Lastly, I'm joined by Overwatch casters and analysts Seamoose and Heurix to break down tonight's matches. But first, the scoreboard. The first match of the evening featured the London Spitfire against the Los Angeles Gladiators. The Spitfire came in heavily favored to win this match, but Surefour & Company put up an intense fight and forced a tiebreaker map on Lijiang Tower. On Lijiang Tower, the LA Gladiators decided to run a triple DPS composition with Surefour on Junkrat, Asher on Tracer, and Shaz, the team Zenyatta, playing Genji. This same DPS composition is also what allowed the Gladiators to win on Numbani earlier in the match. In the end, the Gladiators complete the upset and defeat the London Spitfire 3-2. Next up was the most anticipated match of the week as Taimu and the Dallas Fuel take on Jake and the Outlaws. The Fuel looked shaky at first as Linkser, Jake, and Coolmat were able to put pressure on the Fuel's supports and take a surprisingly decisive win on Dorado 2-1. That was the most one-sided this match would get as the Fuel would battle back to take Temple of Anubis and Oasis before the Houston Outlaws hold the Dallas Fuel to 2 points on Eichenwald. In the second tiebreaker of the evening, we again go to Lijiang Tower. Round 1 and 2 were split between the two by a score of 100 to 99%. However, it was Seagull's Junkrat and Effects Zarya that would eventually lead to the win on Lijiang Tower, and ultimately the Fuel would win the series 3-2. For the last match of the evening, it was the New York Excelsior going up against the Boston Uprising. While there were some redeeming moments for Boston in this series, Sabiobi and company would prove to be too much for the Uprising and end up taking the series 3-1. That's last night's scoreboard. Now let's go to Overwatch casters and analysts Seamoose and Heurix to discuss what went down. Heurix, let's start with the Gladiators and Spitfire matchup. The first match at Junkertown set a surprising tone as the Gladiators took the map 2-1. What do you think contributed to that?
Oh, Canada, right? Or you could say, oh, Surefour. I don't know. Don't sue me for that. This is essentially the same pirate ship idea we saw in the World Cup. Surefour just on the Bastion, pushing the payload through. And since Surefour probably has the most experience with Bastion in the whole league, I guess it's no surprise that his team was able to successfully deny that initial setup of the pirate ship coming out from the Spitfire, which inevitably led to Spitfire taking a lot of time just trying to reestablish that control of the point. And whenever they did, they had to deal with that shield pressure coming from McCree, Junkrat, Orisa, Roadhog. All the while, the supports were just fairly safe in the back with no flank threat at all coming in from the Spitfire.
What about the adjustments that London made on Horizon Lunar Colony and Ilios?
On Horizon, we see them utilizing the KD Panthera DPS core, where Rascal continuously just altered the map geometry right before LA's eyes to split the Gladiators. It keeps their tanks out of line of sight from their supports and weakens their push when they would engage on that second point until they basically just ran the clock out. Gladiators definitely need to find a way to adapt to these mix-ups going forward because they're not always going to be the ones throwing the curveballs a la Junkertown. Ilios itself was pretty straightforward. You put Prophet on a Tracer for a control map, and for his team, he'll be pretty true to his name, I'd say. It's pretty tough as a tank to try to do your job when the Tracer matchup is a mismatch and you're on the wrong side of the Discord orb.
Ultimately, it felt like the Gladiators kind of stole this one. Where were the mismatches?
Really, the Gladiators have a few real threats that I don't think people gave enough credit to when the roster was announced. Surefour seems to be an incredibly solid anchor point for this team, regardless of past team performances, suggesting it might have turned out otherwise. Hydration is perhaps slightly underrated due to his career being spent on CLG, who didn't make too many headlines outside of just their pickup announcement. And Bishu and Remix are guys I've actually had the pleasure of casting from way back in the original Kongarna days, even in like the AG weeklies that have grown into just this incredible duo that, know how to peel for their team just so well. And you add in a performance like the one we saw from Asher, who they snatched up from Combox, and the best British duo outside of Bryn and his shoe, and Big Goose and Shaz, who proved his flexibility on Numbani with that Genji, and that's a pretty solid team. But I think a large factor, too, was the practice LA actually had before the preseason matches. Bishu was actually out for most, if not all, of it. So they were forced to scrim with one of their DPS in his slot, which led to a number of these triple DPS compositions. These comps are basically designed to force the enemy to collectively focus one specific target at a time in order to generate momentum, all while taking pressure from, literally every angle imaginable. It's pretty difficult to pull off. And it seemed like the Spitfire might not have been prepared for something like that, of that nature at least, and especially because they had to sub so many players around every single match, they kind of struggled to adapt because of it.
To discuss the Dallas Fuel and Houston Outlaws match, I sat down with Seamoose to get his thoughts on the match. The Outlaws definitely surprised on Dorado. They handily defeated the Fuel 2-1. What do you think, Seamus, that were the difference makers in this map?
Definitely, this is going to be the obvious answer for most people, was the Widowmaker play and the lack of Widowmaker play. Taimu didn't have a good showing on the Widowmaker. Linkser was popping off. And one thing, too, besides just that straight-up 1v1, you saw that the tank play was overall much better to enable the Widowmaker and enable the DPS of the Outlaws. And that's something that was kind of throughout the series. The Outlaws, just due to the nature of them having been teammates for longer, it seems, did a better job of protecting each other. Muma and Coolmat did a really good job of covering. And that's something that, yes, the Envious guys, the Dallas Fuel guys, have some history together, but with the new inclusions, they didn't seem as synergized overall. And when you not only have someone who's really hot on a hero, especially something like Widowmaker, which can control the game, and then you're protecting that really well, it makes it a nearly impossible situation for the opposing team to counter. That's really what gave the Outlaws the advantage.
Yeah, it definitely felt like while Linkser, I think, really set himself apart in throughout the whole match as someone who was able to carry, I think a lot of people will look at Coolmat's supporting tank play and the way that he was diving on their supports and getting those crucial picks off on those supports. You saw almost every single fight that Dallas lost, they were losing because they were losing their Mercy or their Zenyatta early on, and they couldn't cope with that. Even if they had Taimu there who wasn't getting the sight lines, when they changed, though, they went on to Anubis after that, and they didn't really hit their stride, though, until Oasis. That's where things started to turn on. We started to see the Envious of old. What adjustments did you see them make besides putting in everyone's favorite Seagull to get there and to start turning that match around?
I think the decision to put Taimu on Roadhog with how he was playing today worked much better when we got to Oasis. They also had Linkser play Pharah. This is the Outlaws, and Linkser, for as impressive as the DPS play of his was tonight, was not a good Pharah. He was given so much time to just have space and create opportunities for his team to capitalize on the kills, but he really wasn't doing anything. You saw in Oasis, it was a much better land battle. For Temple of Anubis, it was kind of still the same thing. You saw Chips High-End getting bad spots. That's the thing, too, is that you mentioned a little bit, the support play. It's a little bit unfortunate, and I understand why, but we've missed a lot of the supports dying early, but we've seen so many Mercies dying really early over the past 2 days, and that is such a bad thing to fight from. I wouldn't say that his play had improved, but the Oasis played more to how the Dallas Fuel were looking at the time. And And for Taimu, I mean, overall he had a pretty bad series, but for example, on his Roadhog on Oasis, there were some pretty nutty moments. And like one of the moments that we caught on camera was Linkster being hooked out of the sky and then one shot by him. And yeah, overall, just like that was it just catered more to the way they were looking, I guess, if that makes sense.
Something that was really interesting about that Oasis map too was we saw Taimu, Effect, and Seagull all playing at the same time.
Yep.
Do you expect to see the Fuel try that later on, or do you think that might have just been a fun little show match type strategy?
So before I answer that question, a little aside that I think is very interesting is the fact that Taimu actually played all 5 matches, and he wasn't subbed out once, and I'm pretty sure. Having all 3 of those players is a great boon. It's like a great option for Dallas because not only are they 3 proficient DPS, but they all have styles that are different, so they complement each other really well. Taimu, especially today, but he's been known to be a very mechanics-heavy player, doesn't use his brain as much as just out DMs his opponents, and sometimes he'll find himself in a bad position. With the new Roadhog, for example, that actually works really, really well. And then Seagull had so much space created because Effect was super annoying. I mean, Effect was just a god on Tracer, and Taimu was just being obnoxious as hell. That it was just this trifecta of control that Houston Outlaws had little hope of managing to beat, even though they had a composition that might be all right against that with the fire, but Linkster was not pulling nearly as much weight as he should have. If Dallas Fuel is able to find situations in which they consistently can enable their players to play their strengths like that again, then that would be awesome. Now, with the hero rosters, like with the pools that they have, that could also mean something like Effect stays on Tracer, and then Seagull goes to Zarya, and then Taimu plays McCree. All of a sudden, yes, the composition and the playstyle of some of these players has changed, but it's still working in their favor in terms of how they want to approach the game and how their players actually just naturally play. So to answer your question, yes, that is a very big strength. It needs to be fine-tuned and used properly, because it's not just the kind of thing where you're down in a series and you say, all right, well, why don't we just put our 3 carry players together, because that's not really going to work out. But if they have really set ideas of how exactly they enable each other, that is honestly one of the reasons why Dallas Fuel is so scary, because they just purely upgraded Envious in terms of raw roster potential.
So last question here. We saw the Fuel and Outlaws being one of the most anticipated matches from this week that we could see from the matches. What players should we be talking about after this match?
That's a good question. I'll start with the negatives, because it was unfortunately for the Fuel a pretty significant note. Chips Hyen, if he is playing more Mercy in the future, he's definitely got to improve that. Positives, though, Effect was absolutely fantastic on his Tracer, on his Zarya, overall on everything. I was quite impressed by everything Linkster was playing except for his Fire, and he and Jake played very well. So that's kind of to be expected, right? But I would also say that one of the things that was surprising was that Heurix on Zenyatta, he didn't play the entire match, but Zenyatta is not something that he's particularly known for, but he did really, really well. So for both of these teams, like there's positives to look at. For Outlaws, it's kind of a little bit more expected. Like, all right, Linkster and Jake, these are guys that are discussed a lot. But Heurix was quite surprising. XQC seemingly integrated perfectly on the team, so that's something too that I hadn't mentioned. But those are things that the Fuel could be really excited about.
Heurix, let's talk about the last matchup between the New York Excelsior and the Boston Uprising. The Excelsior are largely considered a top-tier team. Do you think they showed that today?
To a degree, yeah. I think a huge player for the Excelsior is going to be Jonak, and he wasn't even playing. They were actually forced to use both Pine and Libero as flexing supports / DPS, and they made the most of it given the less than ideal roster situation. I think New York fans were looking for a stomp here regardless, but I think that's going too far because, as we'll probably come to find, Boston is just simply not going to be a pushover.
The Boston Uprising, on the other hand, are largely considered among the worst in the league. Do you think they defied expectations last night?
Absolutely. I mean, after the roster announcements, everybody instantly jumped on the Boston guys for not having those huge names. But as time went on and more analysis was done, I think a lot of people were slowly changing their minds a bit, especially after that video that Michael, actually, of all people, put out about them and put on Reddit. So basically, Boston came in today as a veritable wild card. They continued their push of, going against the grain that they started with their roster pickups, and then with stuff like that on their Deathball comp on Anubis, and it went all right for them, all things considered, going up against Excelsior. It's a tough matchup. So really this match was just about Boston seizing that opportunity to show that they have promise, and ultimately I think they at least secured that for themselves.
All right, well, let's go with the last question then. Who are you most impressed by in this matchup?
I think if you're looking for takeaways in the playmaking arena, you have to bring Pine into that conversation with that Widow on Dorado and Anubis. But I think the best part about this matchup was actually Gamzu and Mono on Eichenwald. If any tank mains out there, if you're looking for a good showing of how to make intuitive clutch plays in a tank role, and a main tank role specifically, definitely go back and watch that match over a few times.
My thanks to Heurix and Seamoose for being on the episode. I feel like they added a lot of insight to these matchups that we saw. Make sure to follow them on Twitter at CTHeurix and at SeaMooseA. Now let's go ahead and talk about the matchups we've got coming up tonight. First, at 4 p.m. Pacific, we're going to see the San Francisco Shock take on the London Spitfire. The next match, we're going to see the Seoul Dynasty take on the Houston Outlaws at 6 p.m. Pacific time. And lastly, we're going to see the Shanghai Dragons take on the Boston Uprising at 8 p.m. Pacific. That's going to do it for episode 8. Thanks again to Seamoose and Heurix for being on the show. Tomorrow, December 9th, I'll be joined again by Pixie to analyze the matches and take a look at how the APAC players are doing so far. Remember, you can find the show on your favorite podcast outlets, including iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Podcasts. And we're on YouTube as well. Click on the link in the show notes to find us. If you want to stay in touch, email me at overwatchleaguedaily@gmail.com, tweet me at OWLDailyShow, or join our Discord at discord.me/OWLDailyShow. That's going to do it for episode 8. We'll see you tomorrow.